Hey everybody again, Tom Hoffman with a 3ds Max 2014 tutorial. This one's specifically going to be looking at geometrical modifiers. And the word geometrical I typically refer to as objects. In the previous lesson we learned how to take various shapes, two-dimensional objects, and modify them to create a 3D object using such as extrude, bevel, and lathe. Now what we're going to do is look at specific modifiers, which is a majority of the list, that are made to modify objects that are already three-dimensional. Inadvertently, you could first extrude a shape, make it an object, and then use an object modifier on that. So we know that when we create an object, and I'll keep it real simple, a box for instance, that we have the ability to increase these various segments. And for some objects, this physically doesn't change what it looks like when you hit the render button, but internally it's giving it more mesh, more density. And I had mentioned that it actually is increasing the file size because now the max file has to obtain the information for each vertice. And then we are kind of doing this, we're working with polygon modeling right now. So polygon modeling refers to these polygons or faces that are made by vertices and line segments. So even though physically the model is still the same length, width, and height, for instance, if I do 100, 100, 100, we know that if I hit render, this will be no different. So what I'm going to do here, just for demonstration purposes, is I'm going to go ahead and use a cylinder for our very first modifier. In fact, I'll go ahead and do this in the top view. And I'm going to make a cylinder. And I am going to clone that cylinder 3 times. Actually, I'm going to clone it twice from the original. So I have these 3 specific, and I'm going to go in, I'm going to do an edge face mode. And the very first cylinder, I'm going to take the height segments down to 1. The second, I'm going to leave at 5. And the third, I'm going to increase to 15. So again, if I hit the render button right now, you'll notice that all 3 cylinders look the same. But the one to the right is going to be a lot larger. And when we're modeling, we have to consider the simplicity and if we just creating a cylinder and we're not doing anything with it, we don't need all these segments. That's just going to add to the render time and to the file size, and we don't want that. However, if we're going to modify this, we may need these segments. The first modifier I'm going to demonstrate here is when you select an object, you go to the Modify tab. And again, we have the modifier list here. That's a pretty extensive list. And as a shortcut, if you select the first letter of the modifier you're looking for instance, I hit B for bend, it'll scroll to that category. So I'm going to select bend. And first thing you're going to see here is when you apply a modifier, sometimes you don't see anything happen. And the reason why is because it's requesting more information here. It wants to know what angle we're going to bend out and what direction. We're also going to tell it what axis to bend in. So I'm going to go ahead and increase my angle here to 90 degrees. I'm going to bend the pipe 90 degrees. And then the direction, I'm also going to change it to 90 degrees, so it's coming this way. You'll notice how it bends the pipe, and it has this rigid look because it can only bend based off the amount of segments, the amount of density in the mesh. Y and X are going to give you different results. But for the most part, this is what I wanted. This is what I'm trying to go for, that bent pipe look. Now I'm going to do the same thing here with this. I'm going to go with bend. And this cylinder, I'm going to bend it. I do the same thing. I use 90 and 90. And you're going to see here that bending an item, even though I gave it the same exact modifier to the same initial shape, the internal segments of that object affect how it bends. It doesn't bend at all, actually. It kind of skews it. You probably can anticipate by now, by coming over here and applying bend one more time with a 90-90, you're going to see that it's much smoother, and that's because the amount of geometry in there helps in between each section. So now when I hit render, 3 pipes, all initially the same size and all bent the same way, have 3 different outputs here. And of course, if we were doing a close-up rendering of something, I would probably use this one because it has a nice smooth finish to it. Where if I was doing maybe a piece of piping way in the background of a scene, like in a game or something, that really not relevant, but it's just there for fluff, that piece would probably be acceptable. And I don't even know what I would use this for. I'm not quite sure. A brace in between 2 walls or something. So that's the bend modifier. And the bend modifier can work with any object. You're not always going to get the same results. Of course, if you try to bend a sphere, you may not get anything because a sphere's kind of a weird shape to try bending. But for the most part, if you look at an object and you say, that looks kind of like a board that's bent, the rule is you have to make sure that you have a mesh that has enough segments in it to accept what you want. Now, as we kind of learned from the shape modifiers, that when you create a modifier, or you add a modifier, it's like a layer. Over to the right here, you'll see that the original cylinder is sitting here and the bend modifier is up above. Selected is the bend, and that's where I can make the changes to that modifier. But perhaps I want to go back in and make changes to the original cylinder. I don't have to delete the bend modifier. I can simply click on the cylinder, and now I can go in and make changes. Maybe I want to make it a height of 0. Notice how it keeps the bend modifier, just automatically updates the original cylinder to be affected. Maybe over here I want to take these and take the segments back up. I can go and do maybe 10 segments, and that looks a lot better now. All right, for my next demo, and I'm going to start moving pretty quickly here. Now that we have an idea of how an object modifier works, bend, of course, I'm going to show you another one here, and that is we're going to look at the twist modifier. And it's the same idea here. Just to give you a rundown, we'll do 2 different boxes here. And one box I'm going to completely remove all of the segments there. I'll take it down to 1, 1, and 1. Where the other one I'm going to go ahead and increase the segments to 5, 5, and 5. Physically I render, both will look the same, but I'm going to go ahead and apply the next modifier, which is called twist. And twist does just that. It takes an object and it twists it on its own axis. So if I do 180 degrees, I've twisted the face of the box 180 degrees over the duration of that object. You'll see that it's still kind of rigid here, but if I do the same with the actual box with no faces, and I do 180, you're going to get some ugly results here because it has no segments to segue in between, and you just get a very ugly design. Now this is kind of like an abstract piece of art, yeah, but that's not what I was shooting for. You could see that the orange line is trying to tell you what it wants to do. And when you work with modifiers, you can key in a number, or you can just hold down with your left mouse and kind of scroll up, and you'll see that you can kind of run through these large numbers and see I can twist this thing. Now if I go back to the original box, and maybe for the length segments I want to put in a 10. Notice when I added those in, nothing happened. That didn't change the actual twist because the twist is running on this dimension. So I could actually take this back to a 1 or maybe a 2. And you'll see that it's you know, not once you get to a certain point, it's not affecting the model. Now here's where you're probably going to see a difference. You go to 10, that smooths it out a little bit, and then you do 10, and that's the one that's really going to improve. So if I go to 100 here, now my mesh is really nice and smooth again because there's a lot of segments in it. It's trying to twist it. Another modifier that's very commonly used, and I'll take this back to like a 1, 1, and 1 to kind of show you how this works. Another modifier that's very useful is the taper modifier. And taper is going to do just that. If you negatively taper, it's going to taper in one side. If you positively taper, it's going to take out the other side. Now, if you have no segments in there, this curve feature isn't going to work, but you'll see again that the orange lines are kind of telling you what it wants to do. So if you see that, but your shape isn't taking on that, you need more segments. So if I do height segments, and you can see as I increase the height segments, this now is taking on the taper shape. And that's where the curve kind of internally and externally kind of creates this needle shape. We also have, again, the different effects in the X, Y, and Z. And we can change the primary axis as well in case you're not getting it what you want. There's the upper limit and the lower limit, which at this point doesn't seem to be doing anything. We're going to limit the effect. There we go. And you'll see that you can actually control part of the object. See how that virtual piece is coming in. So a lot you can do with that. All right, the next modifier that I like to share with you, and I'm just kind of using the box for a lot of these. Not all of them are going to be, a box. You can use any primitive you want or any compound object. The next one I want to share with you is called noise, and let's switch it up here. Let's use a plane for the noise. And the reason why I do that is because you can use a plane for things such as water and terrain. Now I'm going to increase my segments once again. The more mesh I have, the smoother my piece will go. And I'm going to click and hit noise. And noise, you should always use the fractal amount. Noise allows you to kind of skew this noise in the X, Y, and Z directions. And the Z is really cool because that's where you're going to get your like ripples. And as I'm increasing this number up, I'm making like terrain right now, or like a crinkled piece of paper or something of that nature. Now, in addition to noise, you'll see that it's got these faces. I could go back in and add more faces. And that is probably what you would do as being new to 3D animation. But we also have another modifier called Turbo Smooth. And Turbo Smooth is kind of my favorite. When you select Turbo Smooth, it automatically doubles the amount of faces, hence it's smoothing out the object. So it's kind of a neat feature here that a lot of people use in character modeling. They do a very low polygon model and then they turbo smooth it at the end for a more organic look. In addition to Turbo Smooth, and I don't know if I had showed you that prior, but if you right click on a modifier and you hit delete, you can delete just that modifier from the list. But another modifier that I like is called Mesh Smooth, and it's very similar to Turbo Smooth. Mesh Smooth kind of does the same thing, but what it does is instead of adding additional faces, it kind of turns them into NURB surfaces. And we really don't cover too much on NURB surfaces in this particular level. We're kind of just sticking with polygon modeling. But NURB surfaces are using non-uniform splines to create points in between vertices. And it's sort of like the difference between raster and vector graphics. What we're doing here is sort of like the raster graphics of modeling, where the NURB surface is like the vector-based modeling. And you can obviously set smoothness here by increasing the numbers or decreasing the numbers down, I should say, so that you start getting that ragged look. Okay, some additional modifiers that may help you achieve what you need. Trying to think here, we'll go with the box. Now, one of the things that you may not realize is when you create a box or any shape, you assume that it's solid, and actually it's not. If we could if we could go inside this box, we'd see that it's actually hollow. That it's, even though when we do a compound object, which you're going to learn here shortly, it might appear that it's actually solid. That's just the way the operand works. But we are working with a shape here that is technically hollow. We have a modifier called shell, and what shell does is it pretty much adds a second shell around the inner one. So we have this inner and this outer amount, so it pretty much added a thickness of 1 unit to the whole outside of this box. And in a little bit, I'm going to show you some additional modifiers that I want to get into just yet, where we can cut part of this away, and then we will see that the object has a shell to it, so to say. I'm thinking of if we did a well, we'll come back to that one in a future lesson for sure. We also have, and this one's kind of fun, if you were creating like a wire mesh of some sort, maybe you want a cage, and it would take a long time to model out a cage, to actually build all the bars in there. Well, we have a modifier called lattice, and if you go down to lattice, you'll see when you click it, you get this very abstract type of work. But if you take the radius down to 0 or 0.1, and then you take the octagon radius down to 0.1, what you're doing pretty much, this radius is kind of the thickness of the cage. And we can also increase the sides. So like right now it's 4 sides. We could increase that and it kind of rounds them off. Now again, we don't want to go too crazy because you see as it turns completely white, there's so much mesh, it's probably not practical. But now when you hit render, you'll actually see a cage. And that's just the lattice is based off the original segments of the box. So if I want to, kind of cut down and make it a larger cage here, we can do that. Yet another one that's a lot of fun, and some of these are kind of cool when we get into animation, but if you take like a sphere here for some reason, and we've got one called melt, and I'll scroll down here, we'll find melt, and what happens is you're pretty much melting an object, and you'll see that based off of its original location, it actually will melt, and you can select how it melts. Is it jelly, where this piece just kind of keeps going? Is it glass? And you'll see how they kind of, you might be able to get some really neat shapes from this. Kind of going back here, I'm going to go back to this plane here, and I'm going to actually remove the noise. And there's another modifier called wave. And wave is just that. It's going to give you the ability to add amplitudes that are going to allow you to create this wavy like effect. So you could use this for like a blanket or a curtain or something of that nature. The wavelength, of course, all of these can be animated when we get into animation as well. So it's kind of a neat effect when you're trying to create like wavy water. You can kind of do that. And of course the phase, that's where we really get into, is the phase of animated water where the waves are kind of rolling in. I'm going to go ahead and delete wave, and I'm going to go, while we're talking about water, is show you one called ripple. And what ripple allows you to do is to do this kind of the same thing, but it's on a kind of a circular motion here. You'll see that as you increase these amounts, so maybe I want to do like a 5 and 5. Now as I do the phase, the waves kind of ripple out. And then we can also do a decay, which means that over time, I'm going to cut the wavelengths down here a little bit. Over time, the waves kind of taper off. So like if you dropped a ball in here, it would splash and then it would decay off. And that's, of course, the phase is just kind of how we would animate this thing. And I would probably go back to the original plane and definitely add in more segments there for this illusion. There we go. And now we go and do the phase, and there you go. You kind of got that. It falls in and it does its thing. Actually, it would go backwards so that it ripples out. Okay, again, really cool effects that you can use for various types of projects. But I'm going to go ahead and stop there. That is, again, just an introduction to what object modifiers are and a list of ones that we kind of covered. Remember, we did bend, twist, taper, lattice, melt, ripple, wave, noise, turbo smooth, quite a few of them that we captured. But really, the best way to learn the modifier is to just grab an object, go down the list, and kind of check it out. You could also use the help button up here, which allows you to type in a specific modifier, and it'll tell you how to use it. And you know, this tutorial was just an introduction, that it's not meant to be a full comprehensive look at every modifier that's out there. And remember that you can get a different effect by stacking modifiers on top of each other, one after the other. All right, we'll see you in the next video.